Hi, and welcome to this video on determining dependency. All right, so today we're going to start out with a warm-up. So let's read it. It says, some students, or some ASD students, want to form a dance team and has decided on a project to raise money to help with performance expenses. This February, they plan to take orders and money for roses in advance and deliver them to the designated students on Valentine's Day. Okay, so take a minute and brainstorm and write down 2 to 3 factors or things that they might have to consider that would affect the success of this money making project. So, if you're a student and you're a part of this organization and you're trying to raise money, what might affect the sale of selling roses on Valentine's Day? What types of things would you have to do, or what types of things would you have to consider or buy that would affect the success of how much money you make on the day that you sell the roses? Okay, so take a second, stop the video, and think about it and write down some things. Okay, so some of the possible factors that you might have came up with are publicity, appeal of the project to the students, selling price of the roses, cost of the roses, willingness of the flower distributors to work with the student groups, cooperation of the administration. Of course, you'd have to get permission from the principals. So all those are possible factors that actually might affect the success of your rose sale on Valentine's Day. Okay, so why are we talking about this? Well, we're about to start our unit on foundations for functions, or introduction to functions. And so we're going to be talking about independent and dependent relationships. We've talked about relationships and functions, but we're going to dig a little deeper in this unit. Okay, so we can call all those factors that we came up with from the Valentine's Day warm-up, can call those variables. Oops. Okay, so we can call those variables. Let me turn my pen on. And all those variables, which are values that can change, they affect the success of a rose sale. Okay, so why variables? Well, we can call these factors variables because they represent numbers that can change regularly. Okay, so what is an example of how and why one of these factors might change? Okay, well, maybe the prices of the roses increase. Maybe the principal says no. Okay, so any of these factors could affect our sale. Or maybe students decide that they don't want them. Okay, what about publicity? Okay, well, apparently the organization probably has to have a budget for publicity, right? So how they market is probably going to have some effect, right? Of course, the more people know about the sale, then the more customers they will have, right? Okay, so let's look at what a function is. Okay, so we can say that the success of the money-making project, right? So the success is a function of all those variables that we just talked about. So what is a function? Well, so far we've learned previously that it is a relation in which each element of the domain is paired with exactly one element of the range. So each input is paired with exactly one output. Well, let's expand on that definition. Okay, the alternative definition of functions. Well, according to the American Heritage Dictionary of English Language, it defines a function as something closely related to another thing and dependent upon it for its existence. So functions have what we call dependency. Okay, so in order for the dependent value to be significant, we must know, or it must have an independent value that determines that dependent value. And we're going to talk more about that. Okay, so determining cause and effect is kind of like determining dependency, right? We determine, if we can determine the cause, then maybe we can predict the effect, or if we know the effect, maybe we can backtrack and figure out what the cause was. So functions have a kind of cause-effect relationship. So cause would be your independent variable. It rained in my neighborhood yesterday. The effect, my grass grew 2 inches taller. So that would be your dependent variable. All right, so I want you to pause the video and then try matching these various causes. So match each cause to the likely effect. Okay, so take a look at that. All right, so if you came up with match each cause to the likely effect, for climate, that's going to affect the type of clothes worn. For age, well, obviously as you get older, your height increases. Number of minutes you walk, well, that's going to affect the number of calories that you burn. Number of hours that you work, well, that's going to affect the money that you earn. Hours spent studying, that's going to affect your grade in the course. The length of a song, well, that's going to affect the time it takes to download the song. The number of pieces ordered, well, that's going to affect your total bill. And passing your classes the first time, that's going to affect you graduating on time. The number of penalties and injuries, and in here we're talking about a sports game. Well, that's going to affect the amount of timeouts and clock stops. Okay, so let's move on. Independent versus dependent variables. So remember that the cause is the same thing as the input or the independent variable, or in most cases we call the input x. But you can refer to it as any variable as you like, but the most common notation is x. Therefore, if we're using x, the effect, which is the output, and the dependent variable is usually associated with the y. So the independent variable is what you put in, while the dependent variable is the result of what you put in or what you get out. So if we were to evaluate this example, we've learned function notation. So if I'm given a function, f of x is equal to x squared plus 2x, and I'm told to evaluate it for f of 3, well, in this case, x is our independent variable. So that's what we put in. And f of x is our dependent variable. That's what we get out. And so that's this whole thing here. So dependent, and then just the x is the independent. Okay, so I hope that's clear. If not, you can go back and watch the video until you understand dependency. Okay, let's look at another example. The distance that I drive depends on the time that I spend driving at a constant speed. Okay, well, determine and assign a variable to the important factors. Well, the independent, well, the time that I spend driving is the independent, so time would be t, I'm going to use the variable t, and the dependent would be the distance that I drive, because the amount of time that I spend driving at the same speed is going to determine how far I get. So the distance would be the dependent. I hope that makes sense. The time is the cause, and the distance that I drive is the effect. Okay, let's try some other examples. All right, so you have 7 examples here. Assign a variable to each unknown and then identify each variable as independent or dependent. The number of minutes I spend on the phone and how much I spend in credits. Okay, well, obviously the number of minutes is going to determine the amount that I spend in credits. So, or how much I spend in credits. So I'm going to call the number of minutes M, or you can call it T for time, and then I'm going to call the credits C, right? And so this is my number of minutes is the independent variable, and C, the credits that I have to buy, is the dependent variable. Let's try number 2. The hours I work each day and how much money I take home. Well, the hours is going to determine how much money I take home. So I'm going to call the hours H, or you can call it T for time, and the money M. So this is my independent, and I'm going to abbreviate IND, and this is my dependent, and I'm going to abbreviate DEP. Let's try number 3. The amount of sales tax that I pay and the price of an item. Well, the amount of sales tax actually depends on the price of an item. So the price in this case is, we're going to call P, and that is the independent. And the sales tax that I pay, or we'll call that T for the tax, that is actually the dependent. Okay, let's try number 4. How much gas I have in my tank and how far I drive. Okay, well in this case, it looks like the amount of gas that I have in my tank is determining how far I drive. So how much gas, or G, that I put in, that's the independent, determines how far I drive. That is the dependent. And we'll call that distance for D. Okay, what about input and output? Well, obviously input is the independent because it drives the output, which is dependent upon the input. So we could also call those X and Y. Let's try number 6. The time it takes me to get home and the amount of traffic on the road. Well, the amount of traffic on the road is going to determine the time it takes me to get home. So the amount, we could call it A, of traffic on the road is the independent. And the time it takes me to get home, we could call that T, and that is my dependent. Okay, number 7, the size of my villa and the price I pay for rent. Well, which determines which? Okay, the size of the villa is probably, we'll call that S, going to determine the price that I pay, we'll call that P. So this is my independent, and this is my P is my dependent. Okay, so I hope this has helped, and you can go back through these examples as much as you need to. Determining dependency will be a bit new because there's no calculations involved. It's more of your reasoning and understanding what's going on in the scenario. All right, I hope this video has helped, and I'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye.